Good morning. And again, this Monday in Coffee with Dan, I have another important guest to speak about an interesting topic. And it's about the fish, not in the sea, but sweet water, and how Sri Lanka could benefit out of this fish industry. The topic is Sri Lanka's ornamental fish industry. And I'm joined by Mr. Vibhu Pereira. He's the former owner of Lumbini Aquarium and presently its marketing manager. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning.
So, talking about our topic, Sri Lanka's ornamental fish industry, I would like to know how industry started or the history of this industry.
Well, actually, my father and my uncle who started the business in 1952, and there were no airlines at that time. Only a ship, a passenger liner used to call over in Colombo, and we used to take the fish by, hand delivered, and the ship had 2 cabins converted into aquariums, and it was carrying these fish, mainly the marine fish, and they were sent to Holland to a public aquarium called Artis Aquarium. That is how we started exporting ornamental fish from Sri Lanka. And after that, when the commercial airlines started coming in, then the industry took off. That was somewhere around 1960.
So when we talk about these ornamental fish, what are the varieties of these?
Well, you can categorize into 3 areas. One is a marine fish. The other one is the freshwater tropical fish. And also the fish that come out from the lagoon. Those are called brackish water.
How the industry penetrated into the world market as an export-oriented business?
Well, I'll have to go back to the history. When my father started the business, it was only marine fish and all collected from the wild. And no one knew how to collect the live specimens from the sea. So he went to the fishermen who were collecting the edible fish. And in these traps, they found the ornamental fish also coming out. And he advised the fishermen that he would be buying them live. And that is how we started the exports of ornamental fish, especially on marines. In 1985, in 1979, when I joined my father, I thought we should, go into the freshwater because Singapore was the largest exporter in ornamental fish at that time. And they were basically with freshwater. And in 1985, the Mahaveli diversion, the Mahaveli Dam project, made some of the farmers displaced. And I thought it was the best time for me to take this industry to the rural areas where we used to advise the farmer to build a couple of mud ponds in their homestead. And we used to take the fry all the way up to Kotmale, Girandurukote, then somewhere in Polonnarva. I think it was near Topigala. And at that time, it was the time where the war was on. And we used to hear all these guns, But still, I was very happy that the farmers had some sort of income. And the land that was not fertile, it became fertile because the excreta of the fish, when the ponds were emptied, all that water was with the excreta of the fish. And that made the land so fertile. Eventually, they had land which was fertile enough for them to, grow any other product, agricultural product. Subsequently, then there was this Aquarama exhibition in Singapore where we took part in 1995.
Yes, and I understand that parallelly, the prawn industry in Sri Lanka also developed during the same time. But though it was a very lucrative market, it has collapsed by now. So how did you manage to survive in this ornamental fish industry?
Well, I think it's the knowledge that we gathered, the experience that we had. Most of them, we basically put it down into the community, the rural areas, and we advised them not to bring in fish from other countries unless they are completely checked out. And this is the advice that I give even today. For example, there is a KHV virus that goes into the koi carp, especially in Japan and China, and even Israel had this virus. Thank God Sri Lanka hasn't got that virus. And we have to be very careful. I have been talking to the government sources. The quarantining department is very strict on the imports of ornamental fish, not to bring in any virus into the industry. That's how we are taking care of it.
When it comes to your business, you have many local stakeholders involved, especially the farmers who grow these fish varieties in mud pots. So what steps the industry has taken for the past 6 decades that you mentioned to sustain itself locally and internationally while supporting local community of farmers?
Well, I think at this moment, I can say, other than the northern and the eastern part of Sri Lanka, every other part of Sri Lanka, you have the rural folk breeding ornamental fish. And exporters also have developed because there is enough and more fish around Sri Lanka to be exported. And with that type of, the framework, the exporters through the NACDA, National Aquatic Development Authority, and the rural people who are breeding the fish, they communicate with each other. And very recently they had this international forum in Sri Lanka where most of the international speakers came in and gave their input to the industry, which was another asset for the local breeders.
I understand that your father, Mr. Lloyd Perra, and your uncle, Gratian Perra, together...
Gratian Pires.
Gratian Pires, I beg your pardon, together established one of the first commercial aquariums in the country in 1952 called Lumbini Aquaria. And starting from that onwards, you had been in this business. Were you able to get many foreign exports even then?
Yes, as I said, the first export was to the public aquarium in Artis Aquarium in Holland. And there the curator came down to Sri Lanka and showed us how to keep the marine fish in our aquariums, the medicine that we have to put, and we had the most primitive filtering systems at that time. But still, I have been communicating with the international people and that helped us. Lumbini has been always concern in me because I always try to bring in the rural people involved in this industry. Because I was the first person in 1985 to pioneer the outsourcing of freshwater fish. Rather, Lumbini was the pioneer in outsourcing tropical fish. And now it's a great thing that Sri Lanka is now outsourcing most of the ornamental fish from the rural people. At Lumbini, we are breeding mainly the guppies. Actually, I've been called the Mr. Guppy because I have won so many awards. We produce about 400,000 guppies per month. And we export about 300,000 to 400,000 every month to maybe about 15-20 countries in the world, especially to the USA.
When you talk about these main variety guppies, what sort of international demand that they have and in what countries?
I think Singapore in the late 1980s were basically concentrating on the guppies. And it is one special fish that is in demand because the lifespan of the fish is only about 1.5 years. And then people can produce so many different color variations out of one color. So that is where the demand lies. Now in Lumbini, we produce over 2 or 3 new varieties every year. That keeps us in the market because most of the importers would like to see a new color variation coming out. That's the reason.
I understand when we talk about the color variation, the male and the female have 2 different types of colors, or rather the male is more beautiful than the female. But when it comes to breeding, you also need females in the ponds or in the fish tanks. So how do you see this?
Well, it's quite different to the human being, where the female is much more nicer than the male. But in fish, it's always the case where the male is much more beautiful than the female. And to answer to your question, you see, these are 2 categories of fish, viviparous and oviparous tropical fish. Viviparous is the fish that produce young ones straight away. The oviparous fish are the fish that bring out the eggs and they are being fertilized, and then you get the fry.
In today's Coffee with Dan, I have Mr. Vibhu Perra, former owner of Lumbini Aquarium and presently its marketing manager. And the topic for today's Coffee with Dan is Sri Lanka's ornamental fish industry. Now, turning back to our discussion, Vibhu, you were called, as you very rightly mentioned, Mr. Guppy in the international ornamental fish industry. That's because in 1995, you bagged the Grand Champion Award for the best guppy at the Aquarium in Singapore. Now, talking about this, what are the potentials of this industry?
Well, the potential of the industry was shown by this award-winning strain. And then again in 1997, I again won the Grand Champion Award, which has not been achieved by any other source up to now. Now, as I said earlier, Singapore was the largest exporter. Because we showed that we had enough capabilities, the international trade came back to Sri Lanka, and they found that we had enormous varieties of fish which are being produced locally.
So now we know that there is a medicinal value or health benefits of having ornamental fish at home in domestics. How do you help the marine collectors who contribute towards this exporting aspect of the ornamental fish?
Then not only the marine collectors, even the freshwater fish collectors, right? What happens is now there is a saying that even a heart patient, they always advise, the doctor advises the heart patient to look at an aquarium in his home. So much so that if you compare a TV and an aquarium, it's quite different, right? When you look at the fish, you cannot anticipate their movement even for a second. But if you watch a TV program, sometimes you can always anticipate what is coming. So those are different angles where the ornamental fish trade, developed itself for the human being to benefit, right? On one side, we help the poor people. We have over 100 outgrowers in Kurunegala district itself. Their income is about 30,000 rupees a month minimum. And on the other side, if you have an aquarium at home, the benefit that the people who come back after hard work, hard time in office, they can relax seeing a fish tank. That's how it is beneficial to all the people.
Now you mentioned the fact that even the domestic growers in fish tanks can contribute towards this export industry. How does that operate?
You see, Dan, it's not only the fish that we have to look at in the industry. Take, for instance, China. They develop or they manufacture aquariums, they manufacture filtering systems, they manufacture so much of plastic items which are beneficial for an aquarium. Now, Sri Lanka is still concentrating only on fish, but there is enough and more potential to manufacture most of these other items, even including the aquariums. Now, the aquariums that are built in the other countries, in fact, I was in Dubai for 1.5 years, and we were installing acrylic aquariums, marine acrylic aquariums in villas. Still, Sri Lanka has not come into this category of having acrylic aquariums. Of course, they are expensive, but we had to move with the trend. That's what I say. It's not only fish. There is enough and more potential in the industry for other areas.
Do you suggest that having aquarium theme parks in Sri Lanka can generate some additional income to the economy?
Certainly. Theme park is something that in the 1990s we were looking at a theme park in Rakava. And at that time we didn't have enough investors to start it off, because the feasibility study has already been done. Minister of Fisheries is having this, and I think it's time that we have a theme park, because even the tourists, when you look at the tourist angle, locally as well as internationally, I think Sri Lanka is lacking in these terms. So we need to think of a theme park.
Vibhu, what is the government input so far for this industry being considered a cottage industry?
Well, I think for the last 10-15 years, the government has stepped in a big way. One thing I must tell you, from the 1980s, Sri Lanka Export Development Board has been helping us in this industry right through, taking us to all these exhibitions, especially to Interzoo in Germany and Aquarium in Singapore. And then came National Aquatic Development Authority from the Ministry of Fisheries, where they have two farms, one in Rambadagalla and one in Ginagathena, where they develop a lot of new varieties of fish. They train the people there, and that is a big asset for us. And they have, international speakers coming down. They bring down the international speakers, help the cottage industry, the people who are in the rural areas. This is, I think, which was lacking 10, 15 years ago, has now, made us move forward very much faster than what we did 20 years ago.
Now, you mentioned the fact that when you export, you need to go through the quarantine regulations. Now, apart from the quarantine, do you also have to face certain tax burdens in this industry?
I think when you talk of tax burdens, thanks to this government, I think we have brought back the GSP Plus, which is another asset because we were lacking exports to Europe for some time. But now I think that's a great asset that we have got back in terms of value addition. We import fish from Maldives, we import fish from the Red Sea as well. But I think the GSP Plus has given us a lot of advantage back again. And sorry.
No, it's okay. You mentioned that you import from the Red Sea and other important areas in the world. What are the fish that are imported to your industry?
I think it's mainly the marine fish because we lack a lot of variety in our seas. So what we do is we combine the other varieties that are found in the other oceans like the Red Sea and also the Maldive Islands. And we combine those fish with our present orders so that the end user, the end importer, hasn't got to go to the airport 3 or 4 times to collect fish from the Red Sea, collect fish from the Maldives, but they only have to go once in a week to collect all their fish from Sri Lanka. That's the advantage that we give the importer.
You mentioned the fact that the fish have to be exported by air or using airlines. In the past, you mentioned most of the exports took place by using the sea or ships. Now, when it comes to air carriage of these fish, what's the survival duration for fish?
Well, the survival rate is okay because now we have got the knowledge in how to pack the fish. IATA always insists that we have to pack the fish at least for 48 hours. Otherwise, there'll be some destination where the fish have to be repacked and shipped to the final destination. As far as your question, for me to answer that, the airlines, we are lacking in the airlines again. Now, for example, in Singapore, there are so many airlines coming into Singapore, but to Sri Lanka, there is a limited amount of airlines. So that again is, basically, we find it very difficult to find a suitable airline to carry our fish. So if there is an open skies policy, I think that will be the best.
Well, my final question for you today is, what more does the industry need from the government?
I think the government must consider that we have lasted for 6 decades being a cottage industry. I think in Sri Lanka, other than the tea, rubber and coconut industries, I think this is one of the most important industries that have lasted for 6 decades. And if not for NACDA and Export Development Board, we wouldn't have been at this position. But still there is more ground to communicate with the stakeholders of the industry on a regular basis. It doesn't mean that, when there is a crisis for us to meet. I have been always saying this, at least once in 2 months for the stakeholders to meet with the government officials. That will be the best way to move forward.
Today in Coffee with Dan, I was joined by Mr. Vivu Pereira. He's the former owner of Lumbini Aquarium and presently its marketing manager. He's well known as Mr. Guppy, who has won the Grand Champion Award for the best guppy at the Aquarium in Singapore in 1995.
And 97.
And 97 as well.
Yes, yeah.
So thank you very much, Vibhu, for joining in this Coffee with Dan today.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much.
And I will join you tomorrow in Coffee with Dan with a new topic